Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real People, a podcast that highlights some amazing guests who are doing important work to make it possible for people to thrive and be their best, both at work and in the broader realm of living life to its fullest. I'm Harold Hillman, Managing Director of Sigmoid Curve Consulting Group, based in Auckland, New Zealand. I am particularly honored today to host John Spence, a leadership guru and executive coach who lives in Gainesville, Florida. John is recognized as one of the top business thought leaders and leadership development experts globally, and was named by the American Management Association as one of America's top 50 leaders to watch. And there's some impressive people in that list, including Larry Page of Google and Jeff Bezos of Amazon. For more than 23 years, John Spence has traveled worldwide, including to New Zealand, helping people and businesses be more successful. John is the author of 5 books, including his bestseller called Awesomely Simple, and the co-author of several more books. He's a business consultant, a facilitator, an executive coach, and a keynote speaker, including his TEDx talk last year on the leader of the future. Now, at 26, John was the CEO of the International Rockefeller Foundation, where he oversaw projects in 20 countries. And then just 2 years later, Inc. magazine named him one of America's up-and-coming young business leaders. He's been the owner or CEO of 6 companies and currently serves on a number of boards or advisory committees to organizations and executives. John, thank you for being here. What an impressive, you have traveled the world, making the case for strong leadership.
Yeah, I last year was 2 full trips around the world in 12 countries, including New Zealand, which I go to as often as I can. I consider it a second home.
You've spoken at the University of Auckland as well as Canterbury University. Do you have a sort of a formal affiliation with either university?
No, my good friend and business partner, Kendall Langston, teaches or lectures at Canterbury. And whenever I'm traveling anywhere in the world, I always contact the local university and say, if you'd like me to come in and chat, I'd be happy to come in and talk to your students about business and what I'm seeing around the world. So Kendall always arranges that, and it's always a joy to get a chance to spend time there.
We were talking a little bit earlier. I know Kendall and have a lot of respect for him, and love the fact that he is a reason for you possibly to return to New Zealand in the near future. It would be cool to meet you in person, actually.
I look forward to that. I believe I'll be back next year. I'm already scheduled to spend a month in Australia. So if I'm that close, I'm coming down to see you guys.
Absolutely. Please do. Now, John, let's go back to you at 26 years of age. Like I said, most people are trying to find themselves. I certainly was still discovering myself at 26. And probably the last thing on my mind was, running a company or a business. So 26, does that just basically define who you are? Have you always been sort of ahead of the curve?
No, I failed out of university 5 years before that. So I failed out of university on my first try. Yes. And the second try, I graduated number 3 in the United States. So there was quite a turnaround from abject failure to doing pretty good. And then I got hired right at graduation to go to work for the Rockefellers, doing marketing and public relations for them.
Wow. So you had having to get on a correction path, if you will, around life and perspective?
Yeah, well, it's at that particular time, much like you, I had no idea what I was doing. I was pursuing the career that I had been trained for in college, and became sort of the right-hand man to the CEO and to Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller was the chairman of our board. We had 3 billionaires on our board, and everyone else was worth more than $100 million. So I had some pretty demanding board of directors. And it was actually at a board meeting that my boss, the CEO, was under scrutiny from the board of directors, and they were asking him some really tough questions, and he didn't have the answers. And he sort of freaked out and got up and walked out of the room. And one of the wealthiest men on the face of the earth at the time, Mr. Don Tyson, Tyson Chicken, a food mogul here,
Yes.
turned to me and said, "John, can you handle the meeting?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And they all started pummeling me with questions, and I had all the answers. So
Wow.
that's kind of how I moved into that slot. They put me in temporarily. The other CEO was terminated. They put me in temporarily. They brought in another CEO, and I worked for him for about 6 months. And then it's an interesting story. He fired me for playing golf while we were
Really?
away on a trip. And we were in the Virgin Islands, and
Yes.
I stopped. Mr. Rockefeller had his boat there, and I got fired. I was on my way to the airport. I stopped by to say goodbye to Mr. Rockefeller, told him what an honor it was to work for him, and he said, "Hang on a second, why did he fire you?" I said, "I was out playing golf," and he goes, "With who?" And I said, "The head of this magazine, that magazine, this TV show, that." And he goes, "John, what's your title?" I said, "I'm Director of Marketing and Public Relations." He goes, "Isn't that what we pay you to do? Play golf with people like that?" I said,
Isn't
"Yes,
that
sir." He
something?
goes, "You're not fired. You're the new CEO. Take the jet home. Get home. Your first job is to fire the other one."
I love that story. I love that story. That is a fantastic story, and sounds like you had a bit of a baptism by fire in terms of immersion into the role. But what it sounds pretty exciting. What was the focal point around the Rockefeller Foundation in
The
various
foundation that I
projects?
worked for was a private foundation run by Winthrop P. Rockefeller III, and he was quite an outdoorsman. And he had a lot of conservation charities that he supported. And the particular one that I ran did fisheries research all over the world. And we negotiated fishing treaties with other countries and catch limits and things like that. So there was a lot of science involved, a lot of travel, working with other governments, and working a lot. The reason I left the foundation is it became too political. I had to go
Uh,
spend a lot of time in Washington with people that seemed incapable of telling the truth,
yes,
and
yes.
it became too stressful to have to go up there and fight for the oceans and have people just ignore you. And actually, I started getting death threats, and that's when I realized it wasn't worth
Wow.
my job to stay there any longer. It was better to move along.
Wow,
But
that
it's
is that is
well,
something. Death threats. You mean for people who just disagreed with your values and decided to threaten you and intimidate you.
we were doing major league research that in some part contributed to fisheries catches around the world. So I served on a thing called the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tuna, and we oversaw the amount of tuna that could be caught in the Atlantic Ocean. And when you go to a tuna fisherman and tell him that we're going to cut your quota by 30%, that's his livelihood, and
That's
he's
right.
going to come and try to kill you. And
That's right.
it was a little bit overwhelming. But we'll go back to the leadership thing. Yes, it was a baptism by fire. But one of the things that really helped me was Mr. Rockefeller assigned his right hand man, guy named Charlie Owen, to be my mentor. And one of the ways that Charlie mentored me is every Monday he would come in my office and put a book on my desk, a business book. And he said, "I will see you Friday for lunch." And on Friday, I had to make a book report and tell him what I'd learned, what I thought, what the key ideas were. And then he would ask me the same question: what three things are you going to implement from what you just learned? And I would
Yeah.
tell him, he would write them down and say, "Okay, you'll now be held accountable for doing that in your job. Here's another book." So for 6 years, I got a book every Monday. I had to make a book report on Friday, and then I was held accountable for the things I was learning. And that's probably one of the only things that allowed me to keep my head above water.
What a great practice, though. I like that very much
Well,
because yeah,
no, especially the "what are you going to apply" part of it.
exactly. Now that you are a voracious learner, I think I read somewhere where you probably read about 100 business books and countless articles a year. Have you always been a deep learner like that, or did that actually start with that example you just shared with us?
Well, I know I was not a deep learner. I went to a very, very prestigious prep school in America, but I didn't take education very seriously. Hence the reason I failed out of university the first try. And it was actually when I tried to turn my life around in college that one of my professors said that there's only three things it takes to be successful at university. Number one is read the books. At least in university, 95% of the answers are in the books. And I think this still applies. Number two was ask for help. Ask your teachers, the assistants, the other professors, the other students, ask everybody in sight for help. And number three was start study groups, what we would call a mastermind group. And it was then that I started reading and studying and asking for help and learning. And then it just went into hyperdrive once I got into the foundation, because I knew that at that age, I had no business experience whatsoever. And to try to run a company with offices around the world, I knew that I had to learn. And I learned a lot through Charlie as my mentor, but I just became voracious because I knew it was the only way to survive.
Yeah. And did you, in your late 20s or early 30s, then decide that your core purpose or your why was focused on what it means to be a strong leader, this whole leadership realm?
Yeah, it's a great question. It struck me when I became the CEO at that young age that I would lay awake at night worried about all the kids I had to put through college. I don't have kids, never had kids, but I've had to put a couple hundred of them through college in my career.
Yes,
And I really felt the responsibility for taking care of my folks, making sure that they were moving ahead in their lives, that they had good lives, that they could provide for their families, they could send their kids to college. And it was my job to make sure that the company was strong and that we had a great culture and I took good care of them and I could have a positive impact on their lives that would be long lasting. And that's really when I realized the responsibility that comes with the title leader.
Yeah, in your TEDx talk in Gainesville, which is excellent, an excellent talk, you spoke about the leader of the future, and you specifically honed in on servant leadership and how, if anything, that's going to become more prevalent in businesses. And I think that was the essence of what you were just describing there.
Yeah, I have always understood from the very beginning, and I'm not quite sure why, that I worked for them. They didn't work for me.
Yes.
Actually, we worked together, but I've always had an approach of honoring the people that I have the chance to work with and wanting to make sure that I brought my whole self to work and I was authentic and told them the truth and was transparent so that they could do their work and not worry about the organization or other things that were going on. And my greatest joy is always, one of the things I'm the most proud of in my life is when I left the foundation, most of the people that worked for me went on to start their own companies or run larger companies. And it was a joy to see that I left we together created a legacy of leadership.
Yeah, no, that says a lot about the impact that you have had. Servant leadership is a term that still is a bit nebulous for some folks. I was in a meeting 3 weeks ago where the CFO, after hearing that term, denounced it. And then the meeting ended pretty quickly, so there was no time for discussion around it. But his initial reaction was a negative one, as opposed to a positive one. I have a military background, so I was introduced to the construct of servant leadership as an officer. But it's clear this guy and guys like him, probably more guys than women, struggle sometimes with that whole notion of servant leadership. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, I think it's because people believe it's weakness, that you're making yourself not a servant leadership, but subservient to your team, to your employees. And I believe it's the opposite. It's humility and honoring people and helping lift them up, because you can't do it alone. I mean, the success of every organization is dependent directly on the quality of the people they can get, grow, and retain in their company. And I think one of the major jobs of a CEO is to take care of your people, allow them to do great work, help them to stretch and grow, and then they will take care of your customers and your business will be just fine.
I think that that's spot on in terms of what you would really define as the role of a leader of a team, or to your point, CEO of a company. Servant leadership, some would say, is probably falls within that realm of EQ.
Yes.
emotional intelligence. You introduced a new construct. There's IQ, of course, that you talk about in terms of needing to, in the first instance, be relatively smart about your profession, your technical skill, whatever it is. And then EQ, you also talked about. And then you introduced adaptability quotient. And I love can you talk a bit more about that? Because I think you're suggesting that that's going to become even more important than IQ or EQ.
Yeah, and I can't take credit for it. My wife actually we're business partners. She came across that idea listening to the Wharton Business Channel and brought it to me. And I've since done a bunch of research on it. But your adaptability quotient, I also call it your agility quotient, AQ, is your ability in a fast changing world to discard old ideas, change the frame of reference, change the way you look at things, embrace new ideas, have the ability to take two new ideas, what we call the adjacent new, put them together to create something unique. But it's really your ability to adapt at a very high speed in an extremely fast changing world. And that discarding the old can be very challenging for people, and embracing the brand new can be very scary for people. So I believe going forward, because the pace of change in technology is not going to slow down, it's going to continue to speed up. Only people that can move at that speed will be successful as a leader. And Harold, you and I, we've mentioned CEO, but this is whether you lead one person on a team. Heck, if you just lead yourself at any level, every leader has to be able to do that, in my opinion.
No, that's right. That is right. And as to your point, things are just going to get more frenetic in organizations. There's far more anxiety and vulnerability associated with change, which for a lot of people still is a scary thing. And so I think a big part of success in the future is helping individuals and helping teams understand that change is, number one, it's not going anywhere. It's going to start happening quicker. It already is. And number three, probably some people need to reframe change as a positive and necessary thing, as opposed to something that happens to them where they feel more victimized by change.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
I see in a lot of organizations that the folks below the super high leadership level almost don't pay any attention to change at all. It's things that are coming. It just hits them broadside. But I also work with some organizations where even the leaders don't seem to be paying attention to all of the stuff that's going to impact their industry and in some cases devastate their industry. And you ask them about it and they have no idea. Have you seen some of the similar things?
I have, and I was thinking about that as I was watching a couple of your videotapes, because I wonder, you focus a lot on the awesomely simple, and my sense is that you help businesses break complexity down to simple elements that really are major drivers on the business. I think that some businesses just naturally grow more complex as they get bigger, and the focus tends to be more internal compared to a small business in its first 5 years where there's more of an entrepreneurial sort of mindset. And I'm sort of getting the impression from from what I've been reading from you is that one of the dilemmas for a business as it grows is to operate still with a small business, almost entrepreneurial mindset, which would keep people more focused on change, external trends, a bit more external focus as opposed to getting mired down in the complexity of processes, systems, and before you know it, the future has passed by.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that the term I'm sure you've likely heard it is entrepreneurs. People who are entrepreneurial inside of a large company and trying to basically run their team or their group, their department as a small startup, very fast, nimble, agile, allowing the organization on the whole to be a little bit quicker and more nimble.
Yeah, I like that term, intrapreneurial. I like that.
Thank you.
Well, your book, Awesomely Simple. What inspired you to land on what sounds like a very profound construct?
It's what I built my entire career on, Harold. I study a lot, and it's not just books. I mean, I'm working in dozens or hundreds of companies every year, and I have for 30 years all over the world. And when I look at all of this, I look for the patterns. And I'll back up and explain that. There's a great book called the Cambridge Handbook of Expertise and Expert Performance. It's a 1,300-page book written by experts about how to become an expert. So let me save you the reading. It basically says there's 4 P's to become the best among the best in the world at what you do. The first one is passion. If you don't love it, there's no way you'll be successful at it. That just makes sense. It's pretty obvious. The next one is persistence. And if we've read Gladwell's work or other experts in this area, they say it's anywhere from 10 years to 10,000 hours, something in that range. The third P is practice, but it's a special kind of practice that's called deliberate practice. And deliberate practice says, I work on the hardest stuff to get better at that. And I've got a coach, a mentor, a trainer, somebody pushing me, helping me, so that every practice session I'm getting a little bit better. I'm not practicing the easy stuff that I already know how to do. I'm practicing the hard stuff that I have yet to master. And those first 3 lead to the fourth and final P, which is pattern recognition. That when you really understand something at a deep level, you see it differently than other people do. This is great musicians that can look at a piece of sheet music and hear the music in their head. Tremendous, sports people, chess grandmasters. So I've built my entire career on looking for patterns inside of the companies I work with and all of the books I'm reading. Like, people ask me all the time, you read 100 business books a year? Doesn't it get redundant? I go, yes, and that's great. That's the pattern.
That's the pattern. That is the pattern. Do you think that senior executives and even middle managers do enough reading, sit down together and have conversations that stimulate their thinking and push their thinking out? What's your sense of in terms of just the learning patterns in organizations? Earlier in my career had the opportunity to work with Peter Senge and couple of the co-authors from the Fifth Discipline, and the whole focus on creating learning organizations, which would then prepare companies to be more adaptive and agile, quicker, to be able to learn quicker. Do you sense that leaders really are different learners now than, say, 30 years ago?
Wow. Well, let me back up. While you're asking that question, I'm starting to cry a little bit. Here's a statistic. Well, here's why. Here's a statistic that just troubles me greatly. And I've researched this and looked at all the background stuff. But roughly, if you were to read one book every 6 months, or one book every other month, 6 books a year, you'd be in the top 1% in New Zealand or in the United States in your country. 6 books a year puts you in the top 1% in your country. 12 books a year, 1 book a month puts you in the top 1% in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, the average business person reads a half a business book a year after they graduate from college. So spinning it all the way around to your question is, no, I meet very few people who are reading and studying or listening to podcasts or watching YouTube who are devoting a significant, not even a significant, 20, 30 minutes a day to self-development, learning, and career. It's very rare. I teach at universities and stuff all over the country, senior executive level classes, and I will ask people, how many of you in the room have read at least 5 business books in the last year? And not one hand will go up out of 100 people, maybe one person.
Sure.
So 1 out of 100 is reading and studying and learning. I also happen to think the other side of that coin is that's the only way an organization is going to be successful going forward. That with the pace of change and competition, the death of distance, parity on products, so many things have taken away differentiation. If you're not innovative, reading, studying, exposing yourself to new ideas, different industries, things like that, I feel that you will have an extremely, extremely hard time keeping pace in the marketplace.
I completely agree with you. I saw an interesting statistic a couple of weeks ago that in the year 2040, the skills that are going to be required and the knowledge required, the insights, are only possessed by roughly 20% of the current workforce. And so, it is important in terms of just getting yourself prepared more to be, to your point, AQ. That's going to lead to a probably higher adaptability quotient associated with people just being able to open their brains to new ways of thinking. So here's hoping that we continue to make progress on that front. I would agree with you. I don't think it happens enough. Definitely. Listen, we just have a few more minutes. I just wanted to ask you, what are some of the conversations that you've been having with clients around the world? What seems to be the pressing issues as you talk to leaders?
Well, other than the global economy, and you're going to love this, Harold. One of the big things that I'm talking with about senior executives, and I am going to do a plug, not a plug for your book, but I've been working with several young CEOs lately, and one of the biggest things they struggle with is the imposter syndrome. And many of them did not know what it was until I brought it up and recommended your book. So I think all of us, and me today, and I'm sure you still at some level, I lay awake at night sometimes saying, when are they going to figure out I have no idea what I'm doing?
Absolutely.
And I'm supposed to be among the top in the world at what I do. And I'm like, I'm completely lost here. This is just, I'm going to have to sneak in there and sneak out. But so that's been one thing. The other big thing that's been really interesting to me is a much more focus on the idea of purpose in an organization and legacy.
Yes.
The All Blacks are a great example of this. There was a great book written about them called Legacy that, again, I've read and given to several people. And I hear much more talk now about not just what do we do and how do we impact, but what difference do we make in the world and what would inspire our people to come in and give 150% every day because they believe so strongly in the vision and the purpose of the organization. That's been a huge area of focus.
That is good to hear, actually. It does, particularly around this notion of engagement. And I think you made the point in one of your video tapes that the younger people are coming in to organizations. The millennials are coming in already honed in on purpose, aren't they?
Yes. Well, they look at it and they want values. Culture is really important to them. They want it. Well, I did a research study. I'll do it quickly. I looked at the top performing employees at top companies in the world, the ones that could work anywhere they wanted to work. And I asked them then, why do you choose to work here? And there were 6 things. One was, number one was fair pay, not the most. They're not focused on salary or position or title, just pay me fairly. The next one was challenging, meaningful work with a purpose. The next one was cool colleagues. I want to be around smart people that push me. The next one was a great culture. Culture is absolutely essential.
Yes.
I always say culture equals cash. It's the single biggest place.
I like that.
Yeah, well, if I go consult with somebody, we might be able to increase efficiency a little bit, decrease waste, increase customer satisfaction a little bit. But the biggest place you can move the needle by far is improving the culture of the organization and getting more engaged employees. And the fastest way to destroy a company is to have a dysfunctional culture that drives them out of business. I'm a fanatic for that. It's in my formula for business excellence. Number 2 is culture. So we did fair pay, meaningful, challenging work with a purpose, cool colleagues, great culture, personal and professional development. I need to know that I'm smarter at the end of the month than I was at the beginning. My company's investing in my learning. I've got a coach, a mentor. They're sending me to training, to seminars. Professional growth, I need to look up and see that there's a position for me in this job, in this company 5 years from today. Because if you hire top people and they're not learning and growing and they can't really see themselves in your company 5 years in the future, they leave. But the single most important thing that attracts top talent to a company is I work for a leader I trust, respect, and admire.
That says it all.
It does.
It really does. Leadership still is the number one driver on the success of a business, and it's important. It's just really important to the points that you made a little bit earlier, for people to be more purposeful around leadership, because it makes such a big difference, doesn't it?
Well, I've done a couple interviews with magazines and things like that, and not too long ago, somebody asked me what my definition of leadership was, and there's a zillion of them, and mine is you must be a living example of what you hope your followers will one day become.
Wow, I like that. I love that. We'll land it right there, John, because that is a powerful way for people to remember this conversation, in that sense of be the person who, be more conscious and purposeful around the type of leader you really want to be, but also that people would want to emulate. Thank you for that, and thank you for these insights. And where can people find out more about John Spence? Where can we send listeners to find more?
Well, it's pretty easy. My website is johnspence.com. How innovative! But I also, and I mean this sincerely, if someone has a question or a comment, or they want to bounce an idea off me, my personal email is john@johnspence.com. I answer all my own email. Now, I do get 100 or so a day, so it might take me a few days to get back to you, but I'm sincere in saying if you need help, that I'm here to help in any way I can.
That is fantastic. Here's hoping that you do have an opportunity to come back down to New Zealand and maybe work with a few organizations, but also continue to travel across this beautiful nation of ours. It would be a pleasure to host you. And thank you again. Really appreciate your time, and best wishes to you